The galaxy was a place of war, power, and dominance. The Thaurix Empire, led by Queen Syrixia, was one of the most feared species in the universe. With their massive warships, advanced technology, and vast army, they had conquered countless planets, leaving nothing but dust in their wake. But now, a crisis was brewing in the heart of their empire. Syrixia stood at the edge of the observation deck on her flagship, gazing at the stars. Her dark, piercing eyes reflected the cold void of space. She was a queen like no other, strong, ruthless, and unforgiving. Yet even she could not escape the curse of her people. The Thaurix species had once been able to reproduce easily, but that had changed over time. Their bodies, twisted by genetic manipulation, had become infertile. The empire was dying, and soon, without a solution, the Thaurix would cease to exist. But there was hope. A human scientist had come forward with a risky proposition. Dr. Ethan Cross, a biologist from Earth, had a plan that seemed almost impossible. He claimed that humans and Thaurix could produce offspring together. It was a long shot, but Syrixia had no other choice. The future of her empire depended on the success of this unlikely alliance. "Bring him in," Syrixia ordered, her voice cold as ice. The doors to the grand chamber opened, and Dr. Ethan Cross stepped in. He was tall, with dark hair and a confident demeanor. Despite his nervousness, his eyes shone with determination. Ethan knew what he was up against. He had studied the Thaurix for years and knew that convincing their queen would not be easy. But he had no choice. The fate of humanity, as well as the Thaurix, rested on his shoulders. "Your Majesty," Ethan said, bowing slightly, "I come in peace. I believe I can help save your species." Syrixia looked down at him, her gaze filled with disdain. "You believe that a human male can help save the Thaurix? You are foolish, human. My empire has been built on strength and dominance. I do not need your kind to fix my people's weakness." Ethan stood tall, not intimidated by her words. "I understand your pride, Queen Syrixia. But the truth is, your species cannot survive without a new solution. I am offering you that solution." The tension in the room was palpable. Syrixia's advisors, standing silently in the background, exchanged uneasy glances. They, too, were curious about this strange human's claims, but they were not convinced. Many of them believed this was a trap, a trick to weaken the Thaurix Empire. But Syrixia knew better. She was a queen who saw possibilities in even the most impossible of situations. "You will explain this solution of yours, human," Syrixia said, her voice edged with both suspicion and curiosity. Ethan took a deep breath. "I propose a genetic alliance. A single mating between a human male and a Thaurix female could possibly produce offspring. We are biologically compatible in ways that could save your species from extinction. My people have adapted to all kinds of environments, and our genetics might just be the key to saving your kind." Syrixia's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a sneer. "You expect me to mate with one of your primitive males and allow my bloodline to mix with yours? You insult me." Ethan quickly shook his head. "I am not suggesting that. But if the right individuals, someone with strong genetics, were to join, there could be hope. I can ensure the process is safe." The queen's cold gaze softened slightly, but only for a moment. She turned her back to Ethan, staring out into the infinite blackness of space. "You have one chance, human. One. If you fail, both your species and mine will fall into ruin. If you succeed—" She paused, her voice lowering. "Maybe you will prove that humans are more than just a nuisance." Ethan nodded, knowing that failure was not an option. "I'll do everything I can to make this work." Syrixia studied him for a long time, as if deciding whether or not to end his life on the spot. But after what seemed like an eternity, she spoke again. "Very well. Prepare for the trial. But know this, human, if you deceive me, or if anything goes wrong, I will personally make sure your species suffers for it." Ethan didn't flinch. He had heard worse threats in his life, And he knew this was his only chance to help not only the Thaurics but humanity as well. The weight of that responsibility pressed heavily on him. As he left the Queen's chamber, he couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to change forever. Whether for better or for worse, he didn't know. But one thing was certain. The trial ahead would determine the fate of two species. Ethan Cross was escorted through the grand halls of the Thaurics flagship, the massive warship that doubled as their mobile empire. The walls shimmered with an alien metallic glow, and towering sculptures of long-forgotten battles stood in the corridors, reminding everyone of the power and history of the Thaurics people. Despite the grandeur, there was an air of decay, an empire struggling to hold itself together, its future uncertain. He was led to a large chamber where Queen Cyrixia awaited him. The queen sat on a throne made of black, polished stone, her expression unreadable. She had not spoken to him since their initial meeting, but her cold gaze was fixed on him, analyzing every movement. Ethan knew that he was in the heart of enemy territory, with the fate of two species resting on his shoulders. Failure was not an option. Dr. Cross, Cyrixia's voice was smooth and dangerous. You claim that your species could help save mine. I've allowed you this chance. Do not make me regret it. Ethan stood before her, his heart racing, but his mind sharp. I understand, Your Majesty, and I'll do everything I can to ensure success. But the process we're about to undertake requires careful planning and precision. We cannot rush it. Cyrixia raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. So, you admit that this experiment is not as simple as you led me to believe? Ethan nodded, choosing his words carefully. Yes, Your Majesty. It's not just about mixing our genetics. We need to ensure compatibility. And there are risks. Human and Thaurics biology are different. But that's why I'm here. I've spent years studying our DNA, looking for patterns, and it's possible that our genetic makeup could complement yours in ways you've never considered. Cyrixia's eyes flickered with doubt, but she remained silent, waiting for Ethan to continue. Your people's infertility has been caused by centuries of genetic manipulation, Ethan explained, but you still have the potential to reproduce. Your bodies are just locked. My people, humans, are incredibly adaptable. We've survived on Earth by evolving in countless ways to different environments. Our immune systems, our physical strength, our ability to overcome harsh conditions, that adaptability might be the key. A long pause followed as Cyrixia processed his words. She wasn't used to showing vulnerability, but Ethan's explanation made sense in a way she hadn't anticipated. She had always seen her species as the pinnacle of strength and intelligence, yet now she had to admit they were at the mercy of their own creations. So, Cyrixia began slowly. You think your adaptability is what will fix our broken genetics, and you believe this. Compatibility can be achieved with a single attempt. Ethan took a deep breath. Yes, Your Majesty. I believe it's possible, but we'll have to try different methods to find the right one. I'll guide the process to ensure everything is done safely. The Queen leaned forward, her eyes locking with his. And what makes you think that I will trust you? That I should trust a human? We've fought wars against your people for centuries. You are nothing more than a speck of dust in the grand scheme of the universe. Ethan didn't flinch. He knew the weight of her words, the centuries of pride and power behind them. But he also knew that pride alone wouldn't save her people. I'm asking you to trust me, not because I'm human, but because this is the only chance you have. The only chance for your species to survive. The silence in the room grew thick. And for a moment, Ethan wondered if he had said too much. But then Cyrixia's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. You are bold, human. I'll give you that. She stood up from her throne, her height towering over him. Very well. You have my permission to proceed. But remember this, Dr. Cross. If anything goes wrong, I will hold you personally responsible. If your plan fails, your species will be erased from existence. Ethan nodded, trying to hide the weight of her threat. But he knew this was his moment. There was no turning back now. If this worked, it could change everything. But if it failed, the consequences were unimaginable. As they moved toward the preparation chambers, Ethan couldn't help but feel the tension in the air. The Queen's cold demeanor had never wavered, but her actions now suggested something different, perhaps a flicker of hope buried beneath her arrogance and pride. In the sterile, high-tech lab, Sirixia stood still as Ethan adjusted the equipment, preparing for the first phase of the experiment. He could see the subtle tension in her posture, the way she clutched her hands behind her back, as if trying to hold on to some semblance of control. Ethan knew that for a creature as powerful as Sirixia, being vulnerable was a concept she struggled to grasp. "You'll be fine," Ethan said, trying to reassure her. "I studied your species in detail. The procedure will be safe." Sirixia didn't respond, but her gaze softened, just for a moment, as she looked at him. Then, she turned her attention to the equipment in front of her, clearly not wanting to show any more weakness. The air was thick with anticipation, but both of them knew that this was just the beginning. The fate of their species and their uneasy alliance would be determined in the coming hours. Would the experiment succeed, or would it become the spark that led to even greater conflict? Cliffhanger. As the procedure began, both Ethan and Sirixia felt a strange shift in the air, a feeling of uncertainty and possibility. The first step had been taken, but neither of them knew if it would lead to salvation or ruin. The sterile, cold room buzzed with the hum of machinery as Dr. Ethan Cross adjusted the final settings on the equipment. Sirixia stood tall beside him, her sharp eyes scanning the various monitors, her body rigid with anticipation. For the Thaurix Queen, a species who had ruled with an iron fist for centuries, this moment was both terrifying and necessary. She had put her trust in a human, something she never thought she would do. The air between them crackled with an odd mix of tension and expectation. Ethan could feel it in his chest, the weight of the decision, the pressure of the moment. This experiment was their last hope. If it worked, it could mean the survival of the Thaurix. But if it failed, both their species could be doomed. "You must understand, Ethan," Sirixia said, her voice low and controlled. "If this fails, the consequences for your people will be unimaginable. You and your species will bear the full weight of failure." Ethan turned to face her, trying to steady his nerves. "I know, Your Majesty, but I'm doing everything I can to make sure this works. I've studied your species, your genetics. I know this is our best shot." Her eyes narrowed, assessing him carefully. "I hope you're right. I don't trust easily, but I'm willing to give you this chance. For the future of my empire." The Queen's words were chilling, but Ethan remained calm. They both knew what was at stake. The room seemed smaller now, the walls closing in on them as the tension built. Ethan adjusted the controls on the machine, his fingers moving swiftly, almost mechanically. Every second felt like an eternity. Sirixia shifted, her golden skin gleaming under the soft lights of the lab. She had taken her place on the examination table, her long, powerful form a reminder of the strength her people once held. But now, it was her vulnerability that she had to face. Ethan couldn't help but notice how much the Queen had changed since their first meeting. The arrogance and pride that had defined her were still there, but beneath them, he could see the cracks. Sirixia had always been the ruler, the powerful queen who never showed weakness. Yet here she was, putting her trust in a human, in a procedure that could either save her people or bring them to the brink of extinction. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he began the procedure. The machine hummed louder now, a deep rhythmic sound that seemed to fill the room. He knew the risks. They were both entering uncharted territory. The genetic compatibility was unknown. The outcome could go either way. "You need to relax," Ethan said, his voice soft yet firm. "The more at ease you are, the better this will go." Sirixia shot him a look, but there was a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "You think I need to relax," she replied with a wry smile. "I am a queen. I do not relax." Ethan couldn't help but smile back. Despite the gravity of the situation, there was something oddly comforting about her response. Maybe, just maybe, this could work. They were both facing the unknown, and the bond between them, strange as it was, felt stronger than it had before. The machine came to life with a soft whirring sound, and the room filled with the faint glow of light as the procedure began. Ethan carefully monitored the readings, watching the data scroll across the screens. He had prepared for this moment for years, but now that it was happening, the reality was much more intense than he had ever imagined. Syrixia's breathing slowed, and Ethan could see her body reacting to the process. Her eyes remained fixed on the ceiling, her face unreadable. She was the queen of an entire species, a leader who had seen countless battles and conquered countless worlds. Yet now, she was at the mercy of science and genetics. Ethan's heart raced. Every minute felt like a battle. He could feel his pulse pounding in his ears as the data continued to flood in. Everything seemed to be moving too fast, and yet the world outside this room felt like it had come to a complete stop. "How are we doing?" Syrixia asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, one that betrayed the nervousness she had been trying to hide. "We're almost there," Ethan replied, trying to keep his own fear in check. "Everything is going as planned, just a little longer." The monitors displayed a set of numbers and graphs that seemed to pulse with life. The genetic markers were aligning, slowly but surely. Ethan's eyes widened as he saw the results. It was working. They were crossing the threshold into uncharted territory. For a moment, a wave of relief washed over him. But just as quickly, something shifted. The machine let out a loud beep, and the lights flickered. Ethan's stomach dropped. He quickly checked the readings, his eyes scanning the screens for any sign of failure. "What's happening?" Syrixia asked sharply, her voice tinged with panic for the first time since they had started this process. Ethan's fingers moved swiftly over the controls, his mind racing. "It's a spike in energy levels," he muttered, trying to stabilize the system. "There's some kind of unexpected reaction. We need to." Before he could finish, the entire machine hummed louder, vibrating under his fingertips. The lights flickered again, this time dimming, then flashing back to full brightness. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from tense silence to a feeling of urgency. Ethan felt his heart skip a beat. Was this a sign of success, or was it the beginning of failure? He glanced at Syrixia. Her eyes were wide now, her expression a mixture of fear and determination. "What is happening, human?" she demanded, her voice rising. Ethan swallowed hard. "I don't know. But we need to figure this out. Fast." The room fell silent, the hum of the machine filling the void. Something had changed, but whether it was for the better or the worse, neither of them knew. The outcome of their risky experiment was hanging in the balance. The machine's loud hum continued, sending a pulse of unease through the air. Ethan's fingers trembled slightly as he worked to regain control, his mind running through every possible scenario. The beeping had turned into a rapid series of warning signals, flashing across the screens in a chaotic, disordered pattern. The experiment was no longer going as planned, and the stakes had never been higher. Syrixia's gaze was fixed on him, her usual regal composure slipping for the first time. Her golden skin shimmered under the dim light, but her eyes, sharp and calculating, betrayed the growing concern she felt. For the first time, Ethan saw the fear in the Queen's face. It was small, but it was there. "What's happening, human?" Syrixia's voice, usually commanding and cold, now held an edge of panic. "Why isn't it working?" Ethan swallowed hard, keeping his gaze on the chaotic display of data. The genetic compatibility was fluctuating in ways he hadn't expected. The results weren't just strange, they were impossible. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he desperately tried to stabilize the systems. His fingers moved across the controls with increasing speed, but nothing seemed to stop the fluctuations. "I'm not sure. There's an unexpected reaction happening in the gene sequence," he murmured. "The DNA strands are multiplying faster than I predicted." This could be good, or it could be catastrophic. Syrixia's eyes widened, and she quickly sat up on the examination table, her muscles tensing. What does that mean? Catastrophic for me, or for you? Ethan wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. His mind raced through the possibilities. The reaction could mean that the human and Thalric's genes were merging faster than anticipated, a sign that the procedure was working, but there was no telling if it was a harmonious process or one that could cause uncontrollable growth within her body. Both, he said in a quiet, strained voice. If the genes merge too quickly, it could overwhelm your system. Your body might reject it. Or it could kill me. Syrixia finished for him, her voice laced with grim understanding. Ethan clenched his fists. He couldn't allow that to happen, not after everything they had both invested in this experiment. This was humanity's best chance to save the Thalrics, but he wasn't prepared to watch Syrixia die because of a failed procedure. Stay calm, he said, his voice steady despite the panic racing inside him. We just need to adjust the parameters. I'll slow the process down. It should give your body more time to adapt. Syrixia hesitated for a brief moment, but then nodded. Do what you must. Ethan's fingers danced across the console as he inputted new commands. Sweat trickled down his neck as he adjusted the flow of genetic material. The machine's humming slowed down a little, and the flashing warning signs reduced in intensity. Slowly, the monitors began to stabilize, but it was still too early to know if they had averted disaster. What's happening now? Syrixia asked, her voice tense as she reclined slightly, still eyeing the monitor with suspicion. It looks like we've slowed the process down. The reaction seems to be stabilizing, Ethan answered, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. But it's still too soon to know if the changes will be permanent. You'll need to be closely monitored for the next few hours. Syrixia's face remained unreadable as she nodded, though there was something in her eyes that showed her deep understanding of the risks involved. I know the stakes, but I have trusted you, human. You will not fail me. Ethan looked at her, a slight pang of guilt tightening his chest. She had put her faith in him when no one else had. Despite their differences, she had come to him as the last hope of her species. He couldn't fail her now. I won't fail you, Ethan promised, his voice resolute. The room fell into a heavy silence, the only sound the occasional beep from the machines. Syrixia lay back, her sharp features still itched with focus. Ethan continued to monitor the readings, his mind working overtime. The Thalric's queen had always been a force of nature, unbending, strong, and fierce, but now she was vulnerable. They both were. The experiment had gone far beyond what either of them had expected, and now the outcome was more uncertain than ever. Suddenly, the machines let out another series of beeps. This time, the frequency was steady. The data began to fill the screen again, but there was something different about it. Ethan's eyes narrowed as he studied the results. The genetic integration wasn't just happening at an accelerated rate. It was happening in perfect synchronization. The human and Thalric's DNA were aligning in ways he had never imagined. Syrixia, Ethan said slowly, his voice filled with awe. This might be more successful than we thought. The queen turned her gaze toward him, her eyes sharp as ever. What do you mean? Ethan pointed to the monitor. The human and Thalric's genes. They're integrating perfectly. It's like they were always meant to join. There's no rejection, no distortion. It's happening. Syrixia's lips curled into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. I told you, my people do not fail. Ethan nodded, though a part of him was still uncertain. While the initial signs were promising, there was still the question of how this would impact the Thalric's queen in the long run. The faster integration might mean strength, but it could also bring unforeseen consequences. Could her body handle the rapid changes? I'll continue to monitor you, Ethan said. If there's any sign of trouble, we can stop the procedure. But for now, it looks like we've succeeded. Syrixia's gaze softened ever so slightly. Then we move forward, for the future of my people." The quiet confidence in her voice was something Ethan hadn't heard before. The power, the pride, everything that had once made Sirixia untouchable was now tempered with an undeniable trust in him. They were no longer just a human and a queen. They were partners in this dangerous, uncertain journey. As the minutes ticked by, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they had crossed a line, one that could change the future of both their species forever. The air in the lab grew heavier with each passing moment, tension hanging like a thick fog between Ethan and Sirixia. The machines that surrounded them hummed steadily now, their once frantic beeping turned into a calming rhythm. But despite the stability in the system, Ethan couldn't shake the nagging feeling in his gut. The process was still in its early stages. The success of the procedure didn't guarantee safety. It only meant they had a shot, but they were far from being out of danger. Sirixia shifted uncomfortably on the examination table, her golden eyes narrowed in concentration. Her body, still adjusting to the rapid changes taking place inside her, seemed to pulse with an unfamiliar energy. Ethan watched her closely, his eyes scanning her form for any signs of distress. "How are you feeling?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm despite the weight of the situation. Sirixia met his gaze, and for the first time in their entire partnership, she allowed a flicker of vulnerability to show. "Strange," she admitted. "There's a force inside me. I can feel it growing stronger with every second." Ethan's fingers hovered over the control panel, his mind racing. The genetic merging was progressing faster than he had expected. Her body, already resilient, was adapting at an almost unnatural pace. But how would it affect her in the long term? He couldn't ignore the possibility that these rapid changes could cause her to lose control of herself, or worse, result in fatal consequences. He stepped closer to her, lowering his voice as if trying to reassure both her and himself. "We're still monitoring. If anything goes wrong, we can halt the process. But right now, the data looks good." Sirixia's gaze softened for a moment. "I trust you, human. But remember, this isn't just about me. It's about saving my people. We can't afford failure." Her words resonated with Ethan. He knew the stakes were higher than he could ever understand. For Sirixia, this experiment wasn't just a chance for personal survival. It was the future of her entire species. He had to succeed, no matter the cost. Suddenly, a sharp noise broke the silence. The sound of a crackling static that seemed to vibrate through the lab. Ethan's heart skipped a beat as he whipped around to face the monitors. The data was spiking. His hands rushed over the console, trying to stabilize the readings. "No, no, no," he muttered under his breath. The rapid acceleration of her body's adaptation was now reaching dangerous levels. Her vitals were skyrocketing. Her heart rate, body temperature, and genetic activity all fluctuating wildly. Sirixia's eyes snapped open, her golden irises burning with an intensity that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. "What is happening?" she demanded, her voice calm but laced with a rising sense of urgency. "It's too much too fast," Ethan replied, his mind racing. "Your body's responding to the integration faster than I thought it would. If we don't slow it down now, it could overwhelm you." The Queen's expression hardened. "Do what you must, human," she said through gritted teeth. "But don't stop this. I will not fail now." Ethan knew she wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for her entire species. Sirixia had already come this far, and now, despite the dangers, she was pushing herself to the limit. Ethan felt the weight of responsibility press down on him. She had trusted him with her life, and he couldn't let her down. With shaking hands, he adjusted the control panel again, inputting commands to slow the process. The machine's humming shifted to a lower frequency, and the erratic spikes on the screen began to settle. But the real question lingered. Was it enough? As the minutes dragged on, Ethan kept his eyes fixed on Sirixia. Her once still form now seemed to radiate with energy. Her muscles flexed and relaxed in rapid succession, as if her body was preparing for something far beyond what he had predicted. Her breath was steady, but her golden eyes were wild, alive with an energy Ethan had never seen before. Ethan took a step back. "How are you feeling now?" His voice was filled with concern, though he knew Sirixia wouldn't admit to weakness, not when so much was at stake. Her lips curled into a small, enigmatic smile. "I feel stronger than I've ever felt before," she said, though there was an edge to her voice, a dangerous hint of power. "But also different. My instincts are sharpening. I can feel my senses stretching beyond what I've ever known." Ethan frowned. That wasn't good. The last thing they needed was for Sirixia to lose control of the changes happening within her. He wasn't sure if it was the overwhelming rush of power or the genetic alterations, but it was clear her body was pushing her towards something she couldn't fully understand yet. "I need to keep monitoring you," Ethan said firmly, though he couldn't hide the tension in his voice. "We still don't know how far this will go." Sirixia's expression darkened slightly, though her eyes remained fierce. "You're wrong, human. I know exactly where this is going. My people will rise, and I will be the one to lead them." Ethan knew she was speaking with the weight of her people's future on her shoulders, but a part of him wondered if she truly understood the full consequences of what was happening to her. This wasn't just about survival. It was about power, control, and what it meant to be the queen of a species on the brink of extinction. As the lab grew quieter once more, the only sound the hum of the machines, Ethan's mind raced. The procedure had succeeded, but at what cost? Would Sirixia be able to control this newfound power, or would it spiral out of control and destroy everything they had worked for? Suddenly, the queen stood up from the examination table, her movements fluid and graceful despite the intense changes happening within her. Her strength was undeniable, but Ethan couldn't ignore the strange, almost predatory look in her eyes. "Sirixia, wait," he called, his voice tight with worry. "You need to rest. We need to be careful." But the queen didn't stop. Her gaze locked onto him, and for a moment, there was an undeniable connection between them, one that neither of them had anticipated. Her lips parted, and for the first time since the experiment had started, she spoke softly, but with a new intensity. "You've given me power, human. Now, I'll show you what I can do with it." The air between them seemed to thicken with anticipation, and Ethan couldn't help but wonder, had they just unleashed something far beyond their control? Ethan's heart raced as he watched Sirixia, standing tall before him, her body glowing with energy. The air in the room seemed to crackle with the power emanating from her. She was no longer the same queen he had met. She was something more, something dangerous. The golden light in her eyes flickered like fire, her expression one of both triumph and something darker. Ethan could see the tension in her muscles as she flexed them, like a predator ready to pounce. He swallowed hard, unsure of what to do next. Sirixia was no longer in complete control of herself. "Sirixia," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. He stepped forward, but his hands were raised in a gesture of caution. "You need to slow down. We don't know the full extent of what this power can do." The queen's lips curled into a smirk, her voice dripping with confidence. "You don't need to worry about me, human. I am in control. This power, it's mine. And now, I will use it to save my people." Ethan's eyes widened in shock. "You don't understand. It's not just about saving your people anymore. This power, it's changing you. You're becoming something else." But Sirixia didn't listen. She stepped toward him with a graceful yet predatory stride, her movements flowing with an unnatural ease. Ethan took a step back, instinctively guarding himself, though he knew he couldn't stop her if she decided to lash out. "I don't care about the cost," Sirixia said, her voice low but filled with determination. "My people have suffered for too long. I will do whatever it takes to make sure we survive, even if it means embracing this power, even if it means becoming something more." Her words sent a chill down Ethan's spine. He had known that the procedure was risky, But he hadn't expected the transformation to happen this quickly, or for it to affect her so deeply. The queen before him was no longer just a leader. She was something terrifying, something beyond his understanding. "I never wanted this to happen," Ethan said, his voice trembling slightly. "I wanted to help you, Syrinxia, but not like this. This isn't you anymore." Syrinxia's gaze hardened, and for a moment, Ethan felt a wave of fear wash over him. Her eyes, once filled with a quiet strength, were now dark with the overwhelming force of the changes happening inside her. She was still the queen, but she was also something more, something dangerous. "You're wrong," Syrinxia said, her voice sharp and cold. "This is me. This power is what I've needed all along. You gave it to me, and now I will use it to make sure my people thrive. And nothing is going to stop me." Ethan could feel the tension building in the room, thickening with each passing second. He wasn't sure if he was talking to Syrinxia anymore, or to the power inside her, pushing her further away from who she once was. The transformation was happening too fast, and he was powerless to stop it. Suddenly, without warning, Syrinxia raised her hand. Ethan's eyes widened in disbelief as he saw the air around her distort, the energy within her crackling like a storm about to break. The machines around them began to hum, their lights flickering as if they, too, were being affected by the surge of power emanating from her. "You've created a weapon," Syrinxia said, her voice almost a whisper, yet filled with an unyielding power. "And now I will use it." Before Ethan could react, a burst of energy shot from her hand, slamming into the wall with such force that the entire room shook. The impact left a massive crack in the steel, a testament to the strength Syrinxia now possessed. The shockwave from the blast sent Ethan stumbling backward, barely managing to keep his balance. "Syrinxia, stop!" Ethan shouted, his voice rising with panic. He didn't know how much longer he could keep her contained, how much longer he could protect her from herself. But Syrinxia didn't seem to hear him. She was lost in the power, her eyes glowing brighter with each passing second. The room was beginning to feel smaller, as if the space itself couldn't contain the force building within her. Ethan's mind raced. What had he done? What had they unleashed? "Ethan." Syrinxia's voice was soft, almost as if she was coming back to herself, but there was a strange, eerie calmness to it. "You were right about one thing." Ethan's gaze snapped to her, confusion and concern filling his thoughts. "What do you mean?" "I'm not the same," Syrinxia said, her lips curling into a small, almost sad smile. "But it doesn't matter. My people will be saved. I will save them, no matter the cost." Ethan's heart sank as he realized the truth. She was beyond saving now. The queen he had known, the strong, noble leader, was gone. In her place stood someone who was willing to do anything, to secure the survival of her people, even if it meant becoming a weapon of unimaginable power. As the air in the lab grew heavier with Syrinxia's energy, Ethan was faced with a terrifying realization. This wasn't just about saving her anymore. This was about the future of both their species, and he wasn't sure if he could stop her from going too far. "Please," Ethan said, his voice shaking with fear and desperation. "You have to control it. You have to stop." But Syrinxia only smiled, the darkness in her eyes deepening. "It's too late for that, human." The tension in the room thickened to an unbearable point. Ethan's mind raced, but there was no way to stop what had already been set in motion. The queen was no longer just a ruler. She was a force of nature. And with that power, she was about to change everything. Ethan stood frozen in the corner of the room, his mind racing. The walls around him hummed with the energy Syrinxia was channeling. Every inch of the space seemed to bend and warp under the sheer force of her power. His heart was heavy with the weight of what had happened. Syrinxia was no longer just the queen he had known. She had become something entirely different, and he wasn't sure if there was any way to stop her. "Please, Syrinxia," Ethan whispered, taking a cautious step toward her. "You don't have to do this. This isn't the way." The queen stood at the center of the room, her eyes glowing brighter than ever, her features sharp with determination. The raw energy swirling around her seemed almost alive, pulsating as if it had a mind of its own. She was both beautiful and terrifying, a force that could crush anything in her path. "I know what you're thinking, human," Sirixia said, her voice cold but clear. "You think I've lost control, but I haven't. I know exactly what I'm doing, and I won't stop until my people are safe." Ethan's chest tightened. She was so certain, so convinced that this was the only way. But he couldn't shake the feeling that, in her pursuit of power, she was losing herself. If he didn't find a way to reach her, to bring her back, they both would be lost. "You're not thinking clearly, Sirixia," Ethan said, his voice trembling with urgency. "This power, it's changing you. It's not just about saving your people anymore. It's about something deeper, something dangerous. You've become a weapon, and you're starting to lose who you really are." Sirixia's gaze flickered for a moment, and Ethan saw a brief flicker of doubt in her eyes. It was small, but it was there. The queen was listening. She wasn't entirely lost. Ethan seized the moment, hoping against hope that he could pull her back from the brink. "Think about it," he continued, stepping closer to her. "You wanted to save your people, yes. But look at what this power is doing to you. Is this really the way to protect them? Is this who you want to become?" Sirixia didn't respond immediately. Her eyes softened, just for a second, as if the weight of his words were sinking in. But then the air shifted. The energy around her surged again, more intensely than before. Sirixia's voice was louder, more forceful. "I can't go back, Ethan. I can't. My people need this. They need me. I can't let them suffer anymore." Ethan's heart sank, but he refused to give up. "You can still choose, Sirixia. You're not trapped. You can find a way to save them without losing yourself. There has to be another way." The queen's expression darkened, her fists clenching at her sides. The power crackling in the air around her intensified. Ethan could feel the energy pressing against him, pushing him back. It was a constant battle between the queen he knew and the force inside her that was driving her to the edge. "I made a promise," Sirixia said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fury and sorrow. "A promise to my people that I would never let them suffer again. I will do whatever it takes to keep them safe, even if it means becoming something more than I ever was." Ethan's mind raced. He knew this wasn't her fault. This power, it had been thrust upon her, and it was overwhelming. She was fighting not only for her people, but for her own survival. But she didn't have to lose herself in the process. "Please, Sirixia," Ethan said again, taking another step forward. "You can still be the queen they need, but you don't have to be this. You don't have to sacrifice everything that makes you who you are." For a long moment, Sirixia stood still, her eyes flickering between Ethan and the power swirling around her. The room seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for her to make a choice. And then, with a sharp intake of breath, she lowered her hands, the energy around her slowly fading. The intense glow in her eyes dimmed, and the crackling power in the air began to dissipate. I don't know if I can control it," Sirixia whispered, her voice trembling. "It's so strong. It's taking over." Ethan reached her side, his heart racing, but he was careful not to touch her. "You can control it, Sirixia. You can. You're stronger than this power. You just need to remember who you are, who you were before all of this." She looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. For a long moment, she was silent, and then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can remember." Ethan's heart broke. "You can. You just have to believe in yourself." Slowly, Sirixia nodded, her breath coming in shaky gasps. The energy around her finally began to settle, the room calming as the force that had overwhelmed her began to subside. The queen's once golden eyes, now softened, met Ethan's gaze, and for the first time since this all began, there was a flicker of the woman he had once known. "I will try," she said, her voice filled with a quiet resolve. "I will try to find a way, not just for my people, but for me." Ethan smiled, relief flooding through him. He hadn't given up on her, and now it seemed that she hadn't given up on herself either. Together, they could find a way forward. Together, they could rebuild, not just her people, but the queen who had almost lost everything in the pursuit of power. And as they stood in the room, surrounded by the remnants of the power that had nearly consumed them both, Ethan knew that this was just the beginning. A new chapter was unfolding, not just for Cyrixia, but for both of them. And whatever came next, they would face it together.